It is pleasurable to have you listening to my end of semester statistics data analysis presentation on a topic, the impact of educational levels of Ghanaians on democratic support and need satisfactory. I'm Sam Boateng, a sophomore computer science student at Ashesi University. In this delivery, I'll proceed with an introduction to the topic and set forth to present the research questions and associations that guided the studies. I will then lead into the methods used to test the associations, respond to the question in context, and dive into confer the results from the study, and finally discuss the findings with you. As indicated earlier, the topic of concern is the impact of Ghanaians' educational level on their support for democracy and its satisfaction. In my research, I realized that education leads to prosperity, which in turn produces a middle class and fosters the development of middle class values such as self-autonomy, independence of thought, and the right to self-determination. My first literature review confirmed this by saying that education is by far the strongest social factor explaining democratic attitudes, whether measured as explicit support or the rejection of alternatives. Also, in my study, I realized that education systems provide cognitive engagement opportunities for learning about democratic habits. The education system then can provide or does often provide a good for certain practicing democratic habits. This was confirmed by my second literature review that education, by fostering civic activities and cultivating rational informed opinions, has been commonly believed to promote pre-democracy views. Also, in my last literature review, that education helps people understand the rules of the political game and the political efficacy of leaders. This is consistent with a cognitive interpretation of the effects of education on democratic values rather than one which treats education as a maker of economic resource inequalities. The research question that guided the study was, how does educational level impact support for democracy and its satisfaction in Ghana? Two associations tested. One was, is Ghanaians of voting age support for democracy associated with their satisfaction with democracy in Ghana? And does the educational level of Ghanaians of voting age affect their support for democracy? Now, with the methods, the sample I used was from the 7th round of the Afrobarometer dataset, which was collected from 2019 to 2020. The method used was a multi-stage random sampling technique. I specifically subsetted data to include all information about Ghana, which has a sample size of 2,500 of Ghanaians of voting age. I further subsetted the data for these variables. Support for democracy, which was measured by asking the question, which of these three statements is closest to your own opinion? Doesn't matter, non-democratic preferable, and democracy preferable. Again, educational level was measured with the question, what is your level of education? And these were the options and was collapsed into the following: high school, graduate, non-formal education, and basic education. Satisfaction with democracy, which was measured with the question, how satisfied are you with the way democracy works in Ghana? The options available were, and they were further collapsed into satisfied and not satisfied. To the inferential test, for all the two associations tested, both the explanatory and the response variables were categorical. Hence, I used the chi-square test of independence to test the associations between the variables. Now, for the first association, the null hypothesis was there is no relationship between the educational level of Ghanaians and their support for democracies. And the alternative hypothesis was there is a relationship between the educational level of Ghanaians and their support for democracy. The second association, the null hypothesis was there is no relationship between Ghanaian support for democracy and their satisfaction with how democracy works in Ghana. And the alternative hypothesis was there is a relationship between Ghanaian support for democracy and their satisfaction with democracy. This is a bivariate graph that shows the relationship between people's support for democracy and their educational level. An engrossing observation was made from this visual representation. A display for the demographic preferable category of the response variable with the explanatory variable provided an evidence of a smooth increase in support for democracy from people with no formal education to those at the graduate level. Therefore, the more educated one becomes, the more one gets to understand and support democratic governance to any Similarly, a display of the relationship between the people's support for democracy and their satisfaction with democracy speculates that one's support for democracy influences their satisfaction with democracy. However, not all those who supported democracy were satisfied with the way democracy runs in the country, since less than 75% of those who support democracy were satisfied with its workings in Ghana. Now to the results. Since the sample was random and all the expected counts were greater than 1 and more than 80% of the expected counts were greater than 5 for the two associations, it made it convenient and safer to use the chi-square test. With the first association tested, the test statistics reported was 23.848 with a p-value of 0.0000557 and a degree of freedom of 6. Putting the p-value on a 95% confidence interval with a significance level of 0.05, the data provided enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis, and the conclusion made that the educational level of Ghanaians is not independent of the people's support for democracy in Ghana. In order to reduce the occurrence of a type 1 error, I further performed a post-hoc test. A pairwise chi-square test for the explanatory categories did not produce a statistically different result, with the exception of the test for the pair of the categories, no formal education and basic education level. This actually makes a lot of sense in that at the basic level, people do not get to know more about politics and civic engagement to ascertain a stand on the best governance of their choice, just as those with no formal education. Similarly, the test from the second association was statistically significant since the reported p-value was approximately 0 and less than a significance level of 0.05, which was evident enough to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that Ghanaian support for democracy is not independent of their satisfaction for a working democracy in Ghana. Despite the fact that some people with no formal education support democracy in Ghana as well, the study suggests that the more educated the citizens of Ghana become, the greater the influence on their support for democracy. However, their support for democracy does not guarantee their satisfaction with the way democracy works in Ghana. Particularly, other factors like their perceived economic evaluations of the country may contribute to how satisfied they are with democratic processes in the country. This research therefore exposes future researchers to probe into these factors that account for Ghanaian satisfaction with democracy in the country. The study brings the attention of the government to renovate the educational sector to include studies on civic education at the basic level that will prepare the students to take on an informed decision on their civic roles to help develop the Ghana we want through democracy. Some of the limitations of the study was that the sample size was not a better representation of the Ghanaian population, given that only 2,400 out of about 30 million Ghanaian population was taken. And also, some of the options to the responses of the survey questions were not clear, which might have caused inconsistencies in the data collected.
This concludes my presentation.